Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Human Side of Money, powered by RFG Advisory, where our guest today is none other than Parul Somani. Now, if you're not familiar with Parul Somani, she's a global keynote speaker, a mindset coach. She's the author of The Path of Least Regret, and she helps leaders and people around the world make better decisions in the face of uncertainty and change, which, if you're in this business of working with human beings and their money and helping them plan for the future, what you know by now is that we operate every single day in an environment of uncertainty, and it's our job to help our clients make the best financial decisions they can in the face of uncertainty to be more comfortable as they navigate the uncertainty that's almost guaranteed to unfold. Think about it like this. You almost inevitably have had a client come and ask, hey, should I sell my business? I've been doing this for 30 years. Is now the time to sell? Should we relocate to be closer to the kids in a different state? Should I leave my job? It means that we're only going to have one income. Can we do that? Should we do that? Should we buy the vacation home that we've been talking about for years? These are questions that clients ask, but there are decisions to be made in the face of uncertainty. And the better that we can get at helping clients navigate those decisions, the better off we're going to be, the better job we're going to do, but also the better life they're going to live. So she takes us through a life-altering event that she went through a little over 10 years ago that forced her to realize two things. Number one, that most of the decision-making frameworks that we've been taught that we utilize on a day-to-day basis, like pros and cons lists or decisions that are based on data and analytics, that they break down when you're faced with decisions in the environment of uncertainty. And then she also realized that if that's the case, no one really teaches us a great decision-making process for how to make decisions with clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. And so this life-altering event forced her to come up with her own model, her own decision-making process that actually went beyond what she had been taught to optimize for things like clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. So she'll take us through that. She'll talk about why awareness of what's going on emotionally is so important, the mental roadblocks that are going to pop up along the way, why it's important to know your North Star, the things that are most important to you in your life, how to optimize for peace of mind when making a decision, which isn't what we normally think that it is. And then lastly, she makes a great point that we have to know and be aware of the fact that even as we make decisions towards the path of least regret, that things evolve. And she'll tell us how do we adapt when we make a decision and it doesn't go the way that we want it to go. We'll even towards the end play out a scenario where we say, okay, how do we apply this framework to a 59-year-old who's been working in their business for 30 years and is trying to make the decision of whether or not to sell their business? And so if you want a proven framework for helping your clients navigate uncertainty and feel confident doing it while also helping them make better, more fulfilling financial decisions, then this episode is for you. All right. Without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Parul Somani.
Welcome to the Human Side of Money, a show dedicated to equipping financial advisors with the skill set required to work with emotional human beings on the emotionally charged topic of money. You'll get practical tips and insights on applying behavioral finance into your practice from conversations with fellow advisors, industry consultants, and experts in the fields of behavior, psychology, communication, and more. Each episode is designed to help you enhance client outcomes of your advisory business. Now here's your host, Brendan Frazier.
Parul Somani, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm beyond excited to have you join us because as soon as I saw the work that you've been putting out, the book that you have coming out, it hit on a central theme that I've always felt like, ever since we started this show, is at the core of not just life as a human, but the work and the relationships that we have as financial advisors with our clients. And I know we can look at it and frame it a bunch of different ways, and you're going to help us do that. But at the core, in the most simplistic form, I look at it and I think to myself, like, this is the work that you're putting together, what we're going to talk about, your framework is helping with decision-making, and specifically decision-making in the face of uncertainty. And no matter where you are in life, no matter if you're just a human being or you're a client, it's like we all deal with uncertainty, and we all have to make really big, important decisions. It's like nobody really ever teaches us methods or skills or good frameworks for decision making. And you had a quote that I read that I liked that I want to just read right out of the gate that I think sets the tone, and then we can kind of get into it. But you said that life's defining moments rarely come with clear answers. Right? It would be nice if it's like, yeah, I've got this big decision to make, and oh, good news, right? I can see very clearly that if I choose the option A, this is how it's going to play out, and option B, this is how it's going to play out. And if I could just see the future, decisions would be easy. But life's biggest moments rarely come with those clear answers. So I'm excited to get into that. If there's anything you heard there you want to clarify or mention, go ahead. But I think maybe the best place to start is for you, if you can take us back to 2014. You've got a new job, a new baby, and then a pretty life altering situation that pops up. Can you take us back and tell us what happened and how that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2014, I had just started a new job at a startup while I was also pregnant with my second child. And 6 months into the job, literally just hours after my new team had thrown me a surprise baby shower, my water broke and I ended up going in for a C-section 2 weeks earlier than planned. And uh, my daughter, unfortunately, at birth had some breathing complications, and so she had to be admitted to the NICU, and we were entering what we thought was, like, the most stressful, uncertain, and, scary, period of our lives. And she was going through testing and whatnot, but in parallel to that, uh, just a few days earlier when I was still pregnant, I had actually also felt a lump in, my chest, and it would have been so easy to dismiss that lump because my baby was in the NICU, because I was recovering from a C-section, and not to mention I was 31 years old, and because I had, was pregnant as well, when I felt it, was being told it's a clogged milk duct and nothing to worry about.
Mm.
But thankfully, my husband actually wheeled me from the NICU to a neighboring clinic, and we went ahead and got an ultrasound and biopsy. We're again told it was likely nothing to worry about. We went back to the NICU. My daughter, days later, was thankfully discharged with a clean bill of health. And we were actually just back home feeling very joyous that our family was now complete and everyone was seemingly healthy. But then it was on her 1 week birthday when I was in bed with her, holding her in my arms, that I got a call from the breast surgeon saying that the mass is malignant after all. And I had a very aggressive breast cancer.
A week after?
Yes, still recovering from my C-section, and, in that moment, I would say I actually went into the same type of warrior mode or analytical mode that I had been trained to approach problems with, right? Like, through my engineering background in college, through, like, the corporate business world that I had built my career in, it was, okay, let me ask questions, let me understand, let me collect data. And that's what I did. I was like, what is the diagnosis? Like, what does this mean? What is
Mm.
treatment?
Mm.
And it was actually only when she said, and obviously this means you will need to stop breastfeeding soon. It was when that more maternal, like emotional layering on this got thrown in, that's when I started tearing up.
Mm.
And there's a whole roller coaster of emotions that followed during this time period. Obviously, the uncertainty of what does this mean for me, my ability, to be there for my girls when they grow up. Um, it was like getting all of the second and third opinions and talking to other patients who had gone through it, and just going into that same mode of decision making and problem solving that I had always been taught in the past, which is do the research, run the numbers, like look at the studies and figure out the best answer. And so when it came to this life, you know, impacting decision of what treatment plan am I going to choose, that was the same approach that I was having. And I was, trying to get the studies of, okay, if I do this chemotherapy regime, what's the recurrence risk? And if I do this one, what is the chance of survival? And what I found through that is that if I only looked at the data, I probably would have gone aggressive. It's like, let's throw everything at the kitchen sink at it because the studies show that that has like the best survival rate. But when you have a decision that has this emotional layer and you can't guarantee the outcome like we never can, it's not about solving for the decision that's going to be this perfect answer, as if you had a crystal ball, but it was more in this moment that I realized I needed a new decision-making framework because what I had been trained with was no longer working for me.
Okay, do you remember what your options were? Like you just said that the decision that needed to be made, the one that presented itself was what treatment to move forward with. Do you remember like how many different options there were to pick from and what the
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think when you go through an experience like this, the the details are actually like burned into your mind. So
As I was
yeah,
asking
I
it, I was like, well, of course she remembers. This is like a life altering moment. But I just want to make sure first, like, so we can
yeah.
understand, like, what were these options that you were evaluating? And I asked that partially because also gain a better understanding. We can go here in a minute, but to gain a better understanding of what you mean by or how you experienced your traditional approach and decision making methods breaking down, right? As personally as a very analytical, data driven decision maker that also believes in the fact that the emotional and the human side is important, clearly, but there's someone that relies on that. I'm hearing you say that typical approach broke down, and I'm feeling this like fear crop up in myself of like, wait a minute, these analytical data driven decisions can break down. What do you mean? So to help us better unpack that, I think it'd be interesting or helpful to hear what the options were that you were evaluating and how you were thinking through it.
First of all, it was nerve-wracking to even have doctors asking me what treatment plan I want to pursue because I think I naively thought cancer's been around for a long time. The doctors will tell me what to do, and I'll just need to follow those directions. So the fact that it was
Oh.
even actually a question, the realization that the treatment is more of an art than a science, uh, itself was new information and just kind of layered on the concern of the uncertainty around the whole situation.
One question on that really quick. Did you find the doctors and the way they approach it to be helpful in terms of making the decision? Right. Like to your point, you kind of feel like, oh, okay, it's been around for a while. They'll tell me what to do. Here's how to move forward. It didn't play out like that. Like, were they helpful in making the decision? Was it just like, hey, here are your options and the stats that go along with each. You do what's best for you. Like as you, and this isn't meant to be a critique on doctors, but I just mean as you look back and think back on it, how did you feel about the way that they handled it? Could it have been better? Was it helpful?
So I did find that the more opinions I got from oncologists, the more variety of recommendations I got. And so that itself was a bit overwhelming because at some point you need to just like stop asking people
Mm,
their opinion
mm.
because it all starts to become noise. And uh, the way my own care team approached it, it was helpful in the sense that it was presenting, okay, here are two options, and I'll provide the specifics in a second. But just high level, they presented two options and explained the pros and cons, and I inquired about the pros and cons. But I think in the same way that my previous approach to decision making broke down, because there is such an emotional layer to this, it was a similar reason to why they can't actually answer the question for me. And
Mm.
and what I mean by that is that ultimately I have to live with the outcome of the decision. And whether I have peace with that decision, knowing that the outcome is uncertain, knowing that like recurrence can't be fully avoided. I think that's why they posed the question to me or as the patient is that ultimately I have to figure out what feels right for me.
To which, like we said at the top, at the beginning, it's like that's good. Yeah, make the best decision for you with the assumption, by the way, that you've been equipped and trained and know how to best make decisions, right? Like we all get some sort of information, like we all get some sort of approach, right? Like I can remember making T charts, and it's like, all right, list one option over here and the other one over here, or like the pros and cons list, right? But like when you start looking at that type of decision, it feels like those traditional decision making methods also break down pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to dive in on a little bit more of the detail to bring it to life around what the options were, why
Yeah.
they felt different, and why I thought something new was
Yeah.
required.
Yeah, please.
So the two options that I was being presented by my oncologist was one that was what could be considered more aggressive. It was more anchored in standard of care, meaning it's the chemotherapy drugs that have been used for decades. And the benefit of that is that the longitudinal data exists of what that expected recurrence risk is X years down the road.
Mm.
But because they're also standard of care, they've been around for a long time, they are highly toxic. They have very known long-term side effects. But on the flip side, the second option was to look at more progressive options that were more newly anchored in research, where the studies show that they are also effective. They are not nearly as toxic. My hair wouldn't even fall out. But because they're newer, they're based on more current research, the longitudinal data doesn't exist.
Mm.
And if I had approached this in my sort of old decision making framework, what I would have said is like, okay, like what is the clearly the variable I'm solving for here should be survival. So let me look at all of the data that is pointing to low recurrence risk
Mm.
and, best survival rate and really
Mhm.
solve for lifespan.
Mhm.
And I would have just taken a look at the two options available to me, picked the more aggressive one. And for anyone who's, you know, been in this type of situation, your instinct is to also want to just get the cancer out. Like you just want to do something that makes
Oh.
it go away. And it's a very kind of near term oriented
Mm.
thought process of like, yes,
Yeah.
let's just go at it and get it out. And so that would have led me to choosing that more aggressive option.
Mm.
And what I found is that the emotions that I was feeling, like how my body was feeling at the idea of choosing that more aggressive option was telling me that something felt wrong. Like I wasn't able to sleep. I was like literally was having trouble eating. I like wasn't able to just definitively say like, yes, let's go aggressive and let's do it. And that realization allowed me to actually pause and really reflect on why I'm feeling so hesitant. And the clarity that I got by allowing myself that pause was that it's actually not just lifespan that I wanted to solve for. Because when I think about the concerns I was having, the hesitation, it was around, okay, if we go aggressive and maximize my lifespan, what about all these toxic side effects? What does this mean for my long-term quality of life? And it was that realization that my health span was actually also a critical factor for me, became illuminated because I was actually pausing to think about like, what are my emotions telling me?
Mm.
And when I got that clarity of, okay, it's actually this combination of lifespan and health span that is truly my North Star, what I actually want to solve for, that helped me then look at my options differently. But more importantly, it also led me to not feel restricted by the only two options in front of me. And it allowed me to work backwards and say, okay, if what I'm actually solving for is lifespan and health span, and I feel like the two options in front of me it's like they're giving me one or the other, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm. Yeah.
like I'm not sure if I'm necessarily like being able to solve for both with it. Is there a third option that can be created that actually feels more in line with what my North Star is? And maybe it's like a phasing, maybe it's a sequencing of therapies. And so it allowed me to actually approach my oncologist with this proposal that one, this is what I'm actually solving for, not just survival, but really actually thinking about, what level of aggressiveness is truly necessary versus over the top. And it led us to a third option where we actually pursued an initial line of chemotherapy that is anchored in the medication that was, most necessary based on the studies, paired it with one of the standard of care drugs that does have the toxicity, like my hair would fall out, but does not necessarily have those longer term side effects that the additional chemotherapy drugs that they otherwise were recommending would have. And uh, essentially sequenced it so that we were able to agree we'll start with this kind of more cautiously aggressive approach, see how the tumor responds. If it doesn't respond, doesn't shrink, then we move more aggressive, knowing we've collected this additional information that informs the necessity of it. And if it does start responding, then we'll just continue with this more cautious approach. And then at surgery, see if it's all gone or if more aggressive chemo is needed. And what I realized is that is the approach that would give me the most peace of mind, because I knew that I was solving for what was important to me. I was keeping option value open for allowing a shift in course if it became necessary, if new information came to light that implied that was necessary.
Mm.
But when I was only looking at those two options that were in front of me, I was feeling very stuck. I was feeling paralyzed by this kind of what felt like a lose-lose situation. And this question of how do I think about what's going to give me peace of mind initially came to me in the form of, there is no easy answer. There is no path of least resistance. And so what is my path of least regret? And it's when I asked myself, what is my path of least regret? That's what led me into this path of, well, what has since become the three questions of the decision point of path of least regret as a framework, which is, what am I solving for? How do I feel about the options in front of me? And which option gives me the most peace of mind, even if that means potentially creating a new one.
So much good stuff there that I multiple times when, all right, we're diving in there. We need to dive in there. We're going to go there. I'm also thinking that maybe just by default, I know you haven't been to school for it, but since you taught the doctors a new option, maybe we'll just call you like honorarily Dr. Parul Somani. Just so
Oh my gosh, my parents will be so proud.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's do this. Let's go here. Because I think you said something in the book around this situation as a whole that I think was like, it really hit home for me. And I think it does, especially when you work with people in a scenario like with their in life, but also with their money, where there's trade-offs and there's decisions to be made. But you said that the relief wasn't in having certainty, it was in having clarity, because certainty isn't guaranteed, but clarity is. And then another way to look at it was, you said not eliminating uncertainty. The idea wasn't to eliminate uncertainty. It was to embrace it with intention. I think you just like those lines. I think you just explained all that and what you just described. But is there anything else as you hear that you would add on to what you just said? Right? Because I think those are some key points, right? We all want certainty. Like, there's nothing the brain craves more than the path of certainty. Right? And I imagine when those two options were laid out to you, you're like, all right, which one's the most certain path? Which one's the one that provides the most certainty? But at some point you went, hang on, this isn't about certainty, it's about clarity. So like, what do we do with that, right? Like, how do we frame that?
Yeah. So just to expand on that point a bit more, obviously, if there was any certainty involved in my treatment options, for example, where one could say, okay, if you do this, this is exactly what the recurrence risk will be, and this is exactly the side effects that you will get. And then, I can just do the trade-off of like, okay, like which sort of guaranteed option am I most comfortable with?
Mm.
The challenge here is that certainty wasn't there. Like, I'm these recurrence risk data points and these studies may apply to me and they might not. These toxicity side effects, they may apply to me or they might not. And I just don't know. And so I actually had to, in a sense, change my definition of success to change my definition of what a good decision is. Because if we think about a good decision based on the outcome, then it feels much more paralyzing because we can't control that outcome.
Yeah.
And if we can redefine how we think of a good decision based on what is in our control, then you realize it's actually about the process you go through in making the decision. And when I say certainty is not guaranteed, but clarity is, what I mean by that is the intention with which you approach your decision making and the clarity with which you make your decision based on the information that you have at the time is where peace of mind lives. So for me, I couldn't guarantee that my cancer wouldn't come back. I still can't guarantee that my cancer won't come back. But by being so intentional about my approach in the moment, I know that I made the decision for what plan to go with the full clarity that even if my desired outcome isn't achieved, I still wouldn't have made a different decision in the moment based on what I knew at the time.
As I was reading the book, I was reminded of the thing that I tell my wife all the time, and we're at home mainly making decisions for our kids, right? But we're sitting there, and it's like it feels like all these decisions around kids feel magnified, and they are a big deal, right? They're our kids, right? But they often tend to feel bigger in the moment, right? And so we're always reminding ourselves of like, all right, we're just trying to make the best decision we possibly can right now with the information that we have based on like what's most important to us. That's all we can do. We don't know how things are going to transpire. So just so you know, I felt very validated as I read that, and I'm probably going to. But once the book is officially out, I'll get it and I'll go highlight that part and show my wife, just so you know. But you mentioned, yeah, she may not love it as much, but I'm glad that you love it. Yeah. You mentioned that in the face of uncertainty, nothing's guaranteed. The best thing you can do is approach the decision with a process or a framework that optimizes for clarity and intention. And it sounds like you did that kind of instinctively throughout this process, right? You didn't have a framework to operate from. You sort of built your own. I think that's kind of where this book came from, right? Is now you're going, all right, I've sort of defined and clarified what this process and this framework could look like. So why don't you give us an idea of, in the face of uncertainty, what the process could or should look like, or what framework we could go through to optimize our decision making to make the best possible decision we can with the information that we have at the time.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things just to clarify. I would say that I had some form of decision making going into this. It was more that I just realized it wasn't serving me in this most
Oh, good
emotional
point.
and
Yeah,
meaningful
right. Yeah,
decision,
good
right?
point. Right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
like the approach that we're trained with for problem solving or decision making in school or in careers or in business are much more logical. They are analytical in nature. But when it comes to the things in our life that matter most, like our health, like decisions about our kids, like decisions about caregiving, transitions in our career that then have an impact on our sense of self and identity, they're not purely logical and analytical in nature.
Mm,
And what we're never taught is how to actually handle the emotional aspect and the roles of the what ifs and the if onlys and the regrets that we might carry.
mm,
And so going through this cancer experience, it was the lived experience of realizing my old model wasn't working for me, being forced to create a new decision making model real time. And then in hindsight, trying to figure out, wait, what is it that I just did that helped me in that moment?
yeah.
Because what I was finding is that question, what is my path of least regret, was now showing up in all aspects of my life, in parenting, in caregiving, in career, in
Mm,
advising friends. And it was applicable well beyond needing to make just this health decision. And so then it was the journey of deconstructing what is it that worked for me? What is it that's working for others in different contexts of their life? And then that's where the path of least regret in the form of a framework, like a 5-phase framework, actually came to life.
mm,
So the questions that we were talking about before of what are you optimizing for? How do you feel about the options in front of you, and which ones give you the most peace of mind? Those are actually the tools specifically for the decision-making phase of the framework.
Mm.
But what I realized is we are rarely like all jumping to the crossroad and ready to make a decision. To actually be able to define our path of least regret and approach it with resilience and intention, we actually have to be aware of the phases that we've traversed before that point. And so where it actually begins is around awareness of our emotional well-being and what it is that we're feeling when we realize that this curveball, whether it's a diagnosis or a layoff, um, has come our way. And so the journey of path of least regret actually involves navigating the emotional journey that we go through whenever we're faced with change or transition. So first, it's around honoring those hard emotions and not necessarily suppressing them, but recognizing that they're okay and a human part of the experience. But then also not wanting to get stuck in them and just ruminating on them over and over. So then it's entering the processing phase and identifying what those mental roadblocks are that are holding you back from, moving forward with intention, and the tools that can help you with that.
Mm.
Only then can you start uh, exploring and understanding the options with a clearer frame of mind, and figuring out which one ties then to your North Star. Um, and then recognizing that the journey actually just continues, because even after you've made a decision, you've started your path of least regret, there's going to be a new curveball. There's going to be a new change to your sense of self or your environment that makes you rethink and question whether the path that you're on is that still the path that you want to be on, and
Mm.
allowing yourself to adapt as needed without guilt.
So in other words, if I'm hearing you right, it's like we may look at it as a decision or a moment, a career altering, life altering decision to be made. And that is true. But what you're saying is that the process to do that optimally or to make the best decision starts well before the decision and inflection point. We almost have to, I guess what I'm wondering is, you said you have to give yourself permission to feel, to be aware of what's going on. Like you said, when the job loss comes around, does it have to be done in the moment, like as it's happening, or can it be like, because the reason I ask is because I know myself well enough to know I would just shove all that aside, think analytically and logically, and then get to the decision point, and then I would go, oh wait, hang on, I think I'm supposed to traverse the emotional side of this as well. Like, can I go back and ask, well, okay, what was I feeling? What was I doing? Or is it something that has to be done like in the moment?
The way I present the path of least regret framework in the book is as if it's this linear 5 phases, but I actually explicitly say that rarely does our life follow a clear linear path, and
Yeah.
that most likely there is going to be like a wave of emotion that comes here and there. Even after you've decided, you might still like revert back to a previous phase of the process. You might skip a phase altogether and just be able to jump to decision making. It's going to look different and take a different amount of time depending on the context that we're talking about. If it's the more significant things like a health diagnosis, or a significant loss, this process can actually take weeks, months, longer. And if it's a more trivial decision, maybe it's minutes, hours, days.
Mm.
The question of, feeling your emotions, I think what I'm trying to present with the path of least regret is the idea to the reader that tapping into your emotions is an important part of the journey. So if your instinct is to actually push aside the emotions and jump to the analytics, then you're risking having those emotions just creep up later in the form of regret.
Yeah,
And
I'll vouch for that. Yes, that is 100% true. Personal experience. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure it's true for so many of us. And what's important is to recognize that pausing to really reflect on your emotions is not a weakness, right? It's not
Yeah, yeah.
just like not being strong enough to handle what's being thrown at you. It's more about recognizing that those emotions are actually signals, that those signals are data.
So in your situation, your journey, how was that helpful and beneficial for you?
So, first of all, the initial emotions of just like literally fear and, facing your mortality type uncertainty is paralyzing. And
Mm,
so, recognizing that you, when someone is in those earliest phases of shock and disbelief, they might not actually be ready to make a decision. And so allowing yourself that time and space. And again, like I was saying with a cancer diagnosis, the instinct is just want to act and get it out. And some of the best advice that I was given in that moment is that when it comes to a diagnosis like this, months matter, but days do not. Days and weeks do not. And
mm,
so to give myself the time to collect the data, analyze it, understand how I feel about it, be able to propose a new option, that only
mm.
came from allowing myself that pause. And it was a full month that from the date of diagnosis to the day I actually started treatment, which felt like the longest month of my life. But allowing that space was what led me to a path that I can actually have peace of mind with.
Well, it helped provide you the clarity that you needed to know how to move forward, right? And I mean, you
Exactly.
said when you were walking through it, explaining your options, you said something felt wrong, right? And like I imagine, like that was probably part of that process was acknowledging, not just stuffing it down, not just looking at numbers, but just going, okay, hang on, being aware and going, hang on, something doesn't feel right. This is informative. This may not be data on a spreadsheet or a percentage with a percentage next to it, but this is still helpful information and data to help guide my decision.
Absolutely. And it didn't apply only to this health crisis. No, it was a few years after that I actually got laid off from a job that I loved. And my initial reaction would have been to go, well, one was grief and just like the hit to your ego and identity that happens in a situation like that.
Sure.
But then if I had just gone back to recruiting, I would have looked for another similar job. But instead, I actually, had the luxury of choice to take some time and introspect about, okay, this is a new inflection point in my life. What is it that I want to do in my career now? And what I found is that every 3 months, what I thought I would want to go and recruit for changed because I was getting greater clarity and awareness of my new priorities and,
Mm, mm,
you know, kind of goals for that season of my life. And
mhm.
it was 9 months. It ended up being 9 months before I realized what I wanted to do next. And that what came next was actually totally different than being an employee for a company, working in the business world, which is what my entire career had been. And it was actually shifting to serving this mission now, which is what I'm passionate about is actually empowering other people with the mindsets and tools that help me navigate all of these uncertainties and changes in my life.
Mhm.
And that's actually what I want to do as my career. But that realization only came once I allowed myself time and space away from recruiting and interviewing and allowed myself to redefine my identity in a way
Mm.
based on what was newly clear to me as my values and priorities.
The other thing that you mentioned on the path of least regret is so there's awareness, giving yourself permission to feel, and then there's also processing, which is overcoming the mental roadblocks that you mentioned earlier. Whether it was your uh, situation with cancer and that diagnosis and the decision to be made there, or with your job loss and having to decide what to do next. What does that stage, what does that part look like where you're processing? What are these mental roadblocks? How do you overcome them? How does that part play out?
Yes, that is where the ongoing work lives. And this is why the framework is not cleanly linear.
Linear, right, right.
Yes. Because when it comes to the mental roadblocks, those can be stress, those can be ego, those can be guilt, those can be outdated expectations or an outdated identity that we hold. And those are often deeply rooted and don't go away just because we decide we don't want them anymore. And they don't go away in like a day or a week. But one, even just being aware of what is holding us back allows us to then intervene on it. And so in the book, I share specific tools around some of the mental roadblocks that I had and how I used tools like reframing to help move past them and move through them.
I would imagine this may not have been yours in your situation. You have everybody has their own mental roadblocks, but it would be very normal and common for somebody that has been an employee, done really well as an employee, and then climbing. I don't know about climbing the ladder, whatever, but like been promoted, been successful, is used to that lifestyle. It'd be really easy for somebody to, as they're trying to map out their next steps, to go, yeah, okay, so if I start doing my own thing and writing a book and speaking, like there's not a lot of stability there. I need stability. I've always had stability. My parents told me stability is really, really important, especially when you're raising kids. I don't know if I can afford the volatility that comes with not being employed and stability. Like, would that be an example of a mental roadblock on the path to making the decision that's best?
So I think when it comes to financial stability in the decision, it's less of a mental roadblock and more of a logistical roadblock. It's tactical in nature of truly understanding, okay, what
The numbers
are
have to add up.
the numbers have to add up, right?
Yeah,
Like
sure. Right.
you might always have this entrepreneurial itch, but if you as a household cannot afford that drop in income, or can only do it for a sustained period of time, that is a factual data point that can
Okay,
inform
that's
your
fair.
decision.
That's totally fair. Yeah. Let's assume that the numbers add up, right? And then, but go ahead.
There are logistical factors that definitely need to be evaluated when it comes to mental roadblocks. And one that I actually personally did experience in this transition was around my sense of identity. Because when you have been raised to, you know, aim high, you have been wired through the schooling that you've gone through, the career that you've built, that prestige comes from the title you hold, the company that you work at, and what you do is who you are. It's very destabilizing to suddenly not have that to point to. And even just this question that people ask so innocently because they're just trying to make conversation of, so what do you do? Suddenly became this like conversation point where I would like freeze because the idea of not having a title company role to point to felt like I was, not doing anything, which was not true. It's just saying like, "Oh, I'm a public speaker," wasn't a normal thing to say.
I'm an author. And they're like, yeah, sure. Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so I would find myself, especially when in that transition period before I even knew what this new thing is that I wanted to do, just to even be unemployed and figuring it out was highly uncomfortable for me. So I went to my 10-year business school reunion unemployed and without clarity of like what I wanted to do next. And I know people who actually just did not even go to reunion because of situations like that.
All about identity and yeah.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that I went because what I found is that people were actually so warm to the idea that I was actually taking time to figure out the right next thing for me. And if anything, they were actually hoping that they could do the same. But even when I did figure out that, okay, actually what I want to do is this speaker, circuit, that didn't mean that I suddenly felt like that was now my identity. In fact, I remember I created my website when I first launched. Like I literally sat in bed and made it myself. And I think
this needs to be real. People need to know that I'm not making this up. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I need to launch this to the world. But I remember that I used the words, I'm pivoting from my corporate career into being a speaker. And that was the word in my bio. That was the word in different parts of my website. And I really struggled with it because the word pivot made it seem like I was leaving that part of my life and career and sense of self behind and starting something new.
Mm.
And with that, then came another mental roadblock, which is imposter syndrome, because it suddenly felt like I'm starting from scratch for this entirely new career that I'm pursuing. And so when it comes to tools for overcoming those mental roadblocks, sometimes they can be as simple as one word. And it was reframing what I was actually defining my career journey as. So instead of saying I'm pivoting, as soon as I started saying I'm channeling my corporate career into my speaking career, that was like mind blowing to me, because all of a sudden it wasn't starting from scratch as a speaker, but it was building on this big foundation of experiences through my corporate career that I was now layering on top of. And so even just one word was able to start easing the mental roadblocks around identity and imposter syndrome that I had as I switched from employment to self-employment.
Wow, that's fascinating. Much better example than mine of stability leaving a corporate job. Well, nicely done. Yeah, that that was good. But also completely understandable. And by the way, for anybody that's wondering, hopefully you'll go check out the book and the website after this when we're done anyways. But on the website, it now says Parul Somani, speaker, author, coach. Even in your bio, that's what it leads with. Right? I mean, of course, there's still the part in there about what you did in your past, because that's still important. It's not irrelevant. You're channeling that, right? But it's not like what you're leading with per se, which is,
Yeah.
I'm also, now that you have the book in hand, by the way, that we were talking about before we hit record, I'm sure
Yes.
that's also helpful from that perspective to be like, look, it is real. I really did it.
Yes, and and I think this is where the conversation around we're constantly changing comes in, is
Yeah.
that imposter syndrome, that sense of identity crisis was much more acute earlier on when I first made this transition. Now I'm years into being a speaker. I have a established portfolio. It
Right.
feels much more aligned to, yes, like that actually is what I do and it is what I am. But it is also important to me to carry forward those other professional experiences that came before this.
hmm
So while I no longer feel the need to lead with them, they are still a relevant part of my story.
Okay. There's one of these, the elements of this, the process, the framework, decision making in general, that this is, I don't know if I'm going to say this. I don't know if this is true, but it feels like it might be one of the key components, one of the main. Now, they're all important. You might say that they're equally important. It's the one that pops up to me as maybe being the most important. Maybe not, but let's just say it's important. That is, you've mentioned it a few times, defining your North Star, understanding and being clear on what it is that's most important to you. When you were talking earlier, you used the word when you were deciding about what to do as far as your treatment options. You got clear on what you were solving for, and that became your North Star and how you were going to guide that, and how you were going to go about making the decision. So I think my first question would be is oh, and when you mentioned the three questions, one of the questions is, what are you solving for? So I think my first question as we start down that path is what are you solving for, and defining your North Star, is that the same thing, or are those two different things?
They can be similar and they can be different. So, North Star, you can define North Star at like a life level, right? Where it is more of it's unchanging in nature when you think of a personal North Star, because it's more around, our values, the life that we want to live. And when I say unchanging, it can change, but like probably more slowly or less likely. It's more stable. Um, and so when the way I write it about it in the book is I actually do have it as two separate things. Where first it's having clarity of your North Star at this macro level, and then when you think about the question of what am I solving for, that lives more in the context of the specific decision and the
Okay.
specific situation that you happen to be navigating at that time. So you could think of it as like a micro North Star within the decision, but it is more context based. But ideally, when you think about what you're solving for when it comes to this decision, it aligns with your macro North Star. It's when you have clarity of your overall values and your overall North Star, and that can be a lens into the micro decisions. That's where alignment comes from.
Can you take us through an example of how that plays out? And there's a quote that's coming to mind that I say a lot. I probably said on here multiple times. I'm sure you probably heard it, but it's when your values are clear, your decisions are easy, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
To which I always think, like, well, that's not necessarily fair because I don't think decisions are ever easy. But
Yeah.
when your values or your North Star is clear, it'll at least provide a lens to make your decision a little bit easier.
I think that's right. I think the key is easier, and it provides guardrails to how you might want to make the decision. So a specific example, I shared how after my layoff, I was intentional about taking time off and figuring out what that right next thing is for me. And for months, I thought that that right next thing for me would be some other form of employment. And it was just more of a matter of figuring out what type of company, what industry, what nature of work that would be.
Mm-hmm.
When I went through that introspective process, though, I got clarity of my North Star for that was, in a sense, new, which was more around being able to be present with my daughters at this age where they actually wanted to spend time with me and at these like very
Yeah.
formative years of their life. Whereas before, I just never questioned being a working mother, that like, okay, I have my kids and then I also have my job and I'm going to go to my job and come back. And then, parenting just happens amongst all of that.
Yeah. Yep.
But by having this 9-month sabbatical, I had the opportunity to be at home, be more involved, be more healthy because I have had the opportunity to exercise more, be more social, had the opportunity to, and the mental energy to, connect with others. And I got this clarity that that's the life that I want to be living. When it comes to a North Star, I wanted to uh, have a full life in all of those different ways. But I also knew that I have an achievement cup that needs to be filled. And so I wasn't necessarily looking to be a stay at home parent. I just needed to redefine what achievement looked like and what a career would look like.
Mm.
And so having that clarity of a North Star then helped me answer the question of what am I solving for when it came to figuring out this next chapter of my career. Because what I'm solving for no longer was prestige, no longer was, growth stage company or senior title, but it was around autonomy and flexibility, the ability to, work from home or, be my own boss. It gave me a different lens of what I'm solving for when it came to my career. Once
Mm.
I had that clarity of my North Star and what experience of life I wanted to be having.
And so at that point, once those things become clear, then it basically just like knocks off, like as far as like your options or your possibilities or the futures or the path you want to take, it eliminates some percentage of the options that are out there because you're like, all right, well, if it doesn't allow me to be present with my daughters and it doesn't offer autonomy and flexibility, then that's going to be most likely that's going to be a no. I need something that does that.
Yeah, it really raised the bar for what an opportunity would need to look like for me to
Mm-hmm.
actually then sacrifice those things.
Yeah.
Whereas I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it provided that clarity of these jobs that I otherwise would have just been naturally drawn to, because if, oftentimes if people show interest in you or think you'll be good at something, you then get excited about it because they're excited for you, rather than really pausing to think of like, wait, is this actually what I want? Is this what I enjoy doing? Or am I just excited about it because someone thinks I'd be good at it?
Yeah.
And so having that clarity actually allowed me to push pause on those type of recruiting conversations that would have led me down that path, and really focus in on, okay, well, what would give me autonomy? What would give me flexibility? That is something that's more entrepreneurial in nature. And then it's a question of like, well, what is that entrepreneurial thing that I would want to do?
Okay, so while I just double stamp, like check mark, yes, this is all super important, like defining and getting clear, and that makes things so much easier. I often always, that doesn't really make sense. I always come back to the yes, awesome, amen, that is so important. However, I think it's easier said than done, right? Like, I think it's like, oh, I need a North Star. And you sit there and you're like, what is my North Star? So how did you find it, or how do you recommend finding your North Star since it's that important?
A couple of thoughts. One on a North Star is if it's like just holistic on your life, then it's more about thinking, what is that legacy you want to leave behind? What are the values that you want to live by? What is the experience of life that you want to have? But another lens of looking at a North Star is one that I think actually integrates both life and career together. And it's the Japanese framework of ikigai. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, but we can assume that not everybody
Not
is.
everyone is.
Yeah.
So in the Japanese language, there's no word for retirement. There's the word ikigai, which means one's reason for being. And I think it's like the ex-consultant in me who just loves that this is a Venn diagram and it's like this framework that you can like visually see,
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
4 elements, and the intersection of these 4 elements is your ikigai. The 4 elements are what you're good at, what you love to do, what the world needs. And the 4th element, as it's defined in Western culture, is what you can be paid for. And in The Path of Least Regret, I actually redefine ikigai so that instead of what you can be paid for, I bring it back to what is the truer spirit of the Japanese concept, and I call it what can sustain you. Because when you think about
I like
sustenance,
that.
then it's not just financial sustenance, because there could be a point in your career where, having an income and being able to, pay your bills is what you need to be solving for. And yet, at a different season in your life, you might be in a household environment where financial sustenance isn't the only thing. It's also mental sustenance, emotional sustenance. You could be, uh, making money, but if you're burning out and having health problems, that's not your ikigai. If you are not making money, you could be a stay-at-home parent. You could be volunteering for a nonprofit, not necessarily having an income, but are emotionally, mentally, socially fulfilled. And that role, that work, could still be your ikigai. So that's why I like to think of it as what can sustain you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, tying this back to North Star, I think when the prompts for North Star is, I am X or I want Y, it's more overwhelming because it's such a blank slate. And it's hard to know
Right.
how to fill the gap, or like, it's like a Mad Libs of like, okay, what words do I put in this blank
Yeah.
line?
Yeah.
Whereas with Ikigai, I think this 4-phase framework can actually serve as defining one's Ikigai, because it not only gives you these 4 or defining your North Star, because it can give you the 4 buckets that you need to think about, but also gives you guidance that if what you're trying to do is intersect those circles, then you're essentially effectuating your North Star. Is like, what is it and how do I bring it all together? So, thinking about, well, what is it that I love to do? those are all inputs into, okay, how do I live a life that lets me do those things? How do I, live a sustaining life? What sustains you, right? What fulfills you? Getting awareness of those things, the answers to those questions are all forms of your North Star in terms of the life that you want to live and the impact that you want to have.
Have you informed the Japanese that you redefined ikigai? Or do we need to go ahead and make this the official moment that the word gets out?
I think this might be the official moment. I like to think of it, though, as not redefining the cultural concept of ikigai, but more the Western understanding of it. So,
okay, that's fair.
Yeah. In American conversations about ikigai and the American, framework that gets forwarded around, the question is always what you can be paid for. But the my understanding of the spirit behind the actual cultural concept in Japan is more around sustenance. So I hope this actually brings it back to its truer sense.
Okay, all right, fair enough. That was, in fact, as you said it, I was like, that's really good. But yeah, okay, so we're not changing it. We're just bringing it back to the truer sense so everybody better understands it. I like that. Okay, so I think this would be a fun example or a fun way to sort of look at what we just talked about, the path of least regret, the framework, decision making, through a lens that's similar or familiar. There you go. Familiar to those of us that work with clients around their money and decision making around financial decisions. Because we see clients faced with big decisions all the time, and it's not unusual for them to, to freeze, to get overwhelmed, to come to us. Yes, you have to look at it logistically and tactically from a money standpoint, but oftentimes it's not the financial aspect; it's more the emotional that pops up. And so, you want people to come and they'll say, "Hey, I'm trying to decide whether or not I should retire. Trying to decide whether I should stay here and live here or move closer to my grandkids or my kids and grandkids." But there's one that always comes up that I think has all these elements in it that I think would be kind of fun to mention to you and hear your perspective on how you hear or see the framework and the path of least regret in that situation. So typical, pretty common example is you'll have somebody, a client that comes to you and they've got this business that they've been building, their business, they've built it, they've done it for the last 20, 30 years. And now they're sitting there, they're 59 years old and they're trying to decide whether or not to retire, whether or not to sell the business and retire, or do I just stick with it, keep going because, this is my business and I do it well. And I enjoy it. Right. And so they're trying to decide this decision of, do I sell my business and retire or do I keep going? So as you hear a situation like that, take us through how you see or hear the path of least regret. Let me try that again. You think I would know how to say this at this point since you and I are on this together.
It's a little tongue twister.
Yeah. The path of least regret framework playing out or being applied in a situation like that.
Yeah. Well, my initial thought is that financial advisors must also serve as life coaches because these are the types of questions that coaches would want to help navigate clients through also. And I think it's exactly the type of scenario where the path of least regret would be helpful both for the client as well as for the advisor in coaching them through it. It would start by recognizing that even though it's a question being posed as if you're already at a decision point, it's remembering what we spoke about earlier is that there's actually all these emotions that precede the decision point. So the first step would actually be not trying to rush into a decision, but just understanding what is actually the emotional state of the client. How do they feel about, this potential crossroads? What actually led them to this question? Was there some new revelation in their life that made them suddenly question their mortality and their future and how they want to live their remaining years? Or is it, a slow progression of just inertia that they've been doing this business for so many years and have just kind of been trapped in inertia to continue it, and only now are they starting to question it? So really just actually unpacking the emotional state of the client and what's raising the questions in the first place, because even those conversations could shed light on what the underlying issue actually is. Maybe it isn't about do they retire or not or sell or not. Maybe it's more about, with what capacity are they doing the job? And is there a way to continue doing that while also getting more time for the people and activities that they love to do, right? So it's really first
Yeah.
narrowing down what are the emotions and what are those mental roadblocks that make it a difficult question.
What a great point, because I would say that almost always, almost every time, no doubt about it, I would guarantee that it's not just about selling the business or retiring. There's definitely something else at play, a deeper meaning, deeper question, deeper issue that's going on. I can think specifically of somebody who recently sold their business, and it wasn't about the business sale. It was about they were diagnosed with cancer, and that expedited the whole timeline that they had in place. Right? They always thought it'd probably be like 5, 10, maybe 15 years out. They figure it out. They have this thing that happens to them, and so all of a sudden it's like, hey, I'm looking at doing it sooner. On the surface, it presented as, hey, I want to sell my business. You go deeper, it's
Yeah.
like, it's not just about selling my business, it's about retiring. You go a little bit deeper, it's like, it's not actually about retiring, it's about, I saw like the mortality of my life right before me, and it made me pause to go, what do I want to do with the remaining time that I have left? And selling my business is an avenue to giving me more flexibility to do more things. Anyway, so I think that's just a great point, and I would say there's almost always something below the presenting issue, the thing that pops up first.
I think that's absolutely right. Well, as you're sharing that example, what was popping to my mind is that for any coach, for any financial advisor, one of the most important jobs seems to actually be parsing through the noise and digging deeper to
Yeah,
understand what actually lies underneath.
yeah. And when you were going through this earlier, by the way, and talking about the mental roadblock of identity, what I also know is there's a lot of people out there who, when they've built a business or they're the CEO or the founder, right? Like you've established this identity as like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner, I'm important person. I get a lot of my identity comes from being the person that runs this business. People think I'm important, like they look up to me. I get validation from that. All that stuff is going to play in from the mental roadblock identity perspective, right? All those questions are also going to crop up at some point.
Inevitably. I think any high achiever, type A person who has built led long careers is going to struggle with separating what they've done, like what they do,
Mm,
from who they are. And the impact that then has on their decisions. Like, do I step away from this business? Well, they might actually have not been fulfilled in that role for years. They might not have needed the additional income that's coming from it for years. They might actually have been craving for something different for years, but have not been able to actually make that transition because the idea of not being title X, founder of this, CEO of that, is terrifying because
mm.
that's what they've known for so long. And to not have something else clearly defined to replace it is scary.
As we think about this situation, but also just thinking back to all the work you've done, the process and the path of least regret, like, is there anything where you're sitting there thinking to yourself, all right, there's an element of this or a component of this or something that is pretty important and critical that we haven't hit on yet that we need to make sure that we cover? I mean, I'm sure you could probably think of a lot of things, but does anything immediately come to mind where you're like, all right, hang on, we haven't gone there yet. I need to make sure we hit on that to be able to understand or deploy this framework, to be able to use it appropriately.
We touched upon it lightly, but just to really put a pin in it more strongly is this idea that our path of least regret also evolves over time.
Mm,
So we will make
yes.
a decision, we will have done it with clarity and intention, and we will believe we have chosen our path of least regret, and that we are now starting this business because it's our path of least regret, or we have now moved to this location, or whatever it might be. And it's allowing ourselves the recognition that even when you're on your path of least regret, you will continue to change, your circumstances will continue to change, and you might actually need to take a detour from your own path, and that it's okay to do that, that it's not failure, it's not abandonment, it's about realigning your journey to who
Mm.
you continue to, change into being. And the process of path of least regret is actually more cyclical than linear.
How has that played out for you in some of your situations where you've chosen the path of least regret? Because I think it's really good, a really great point, which is, hey, you're not just going to choose it and then all is well. Like things are going to evolve, things are going to change. We need to be aware of that, and we can adapt. So I'm just like, can you give us an example of how what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I mean, even my career journey is an example of how one's path of least regret can change and that it's okay to do that. So, for example, when um, after I was diagnosed and I went back to work, I thought my path of least regret was continuing to be employment for another company, and it was shifting companies, that was shifting industries. So path of least regret was now switching into healthcare, right? And that's like the goal. That's where I want to be working. Realizing when I after my sabbatical that actually maybe I don't want to be working in healthcare anymore. Maybe I don't want to be an employee. Maybe I don't want to be um, you know, defining everything based on just my cancer experience. That was choosing a new path of least regret for me. So even
Mm,
even becoming this, onto this career path of speaker, author, coach was actually a detour from a previous path of least regret. And I shared how the reason I went down that path was because I wanted to optimize around autonomy and flexibility and presence with my children. And while that's still incredibly important to me, I also know that right now I'm in a season of life where I'm launching this book and things are busier than they were before. And so my path of least regret is now to do my best with this launch. And that
mm,
means that I am, needing to pull back on just how present at all times. I might be on the parenting front, but it's with that clarity that in this season, what I'm solving for is bringing this book into the world and driving impact there, and having my kids be part of that journey. Um, but it's definitely requiring, like, a different approach,
mm.
now newly defined by a different type of clarity on what I'm solving for in my career, in these months or in this
Yeah,
year.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, that's awesome. I think that's great. Super important. Um, we're gonna go to the rapid fire 3-pack of questions if you're ready.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.
The deep breath and oh boy, that's good.
The
Okay.
the stress
Uh,
levels are already high. Okay.
you get the opportunity to gift a book to everybody in the audience that's listening. What would it be?
So, assuming it's not allowed to be my own book, The Path of
Oh, right.
Least
Yeah,
Regret.
yeah. I forgot. Yeah, I forgot that disclaimer. You know, that's already taken care of. They all have a copy of your book. What is the next best book that they should read?
Well, one book that I really enjoyed reading that also informed a lot of what I share in my own book is called Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett. And it really shares a lot of the science that underlines the importance of tapping into our emotions and really naming our emotions. And I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with and might view as a weakness or as rumination. And so to get that understanding of why that's actually important to do, not only helps us, but even in how I parent my kids and help teach them the importance of being in tune with their emotions and why that's important, has
Mm,
been powerful.
yeah, that's convicting. But totally agree. Where I sit there, I'm like, hang on, am I lashing out because of something they're doing, or is this my own issue that's happening right now? It's like 99% of the time, I'm like, oh shoot. that's my problem.
Mhm.
Conversation for another time. But yes,
Yeah.
totally get that. You get the opportunity now to hang a poster on the wall in the office of everybody that's listening, spread a message around the world. What would it say?
It would actually pose a question, which unsurprisingly from this conversation would be, what is my path of least regret? Because
Yeah.
I
I
would
mean,
want that reminder to everyone in their rooms and offices that as they are living and leading their life, that they are keeping that question in mind, because as much as we've discussed it as this phase framework in this conversation, at the end of the day, it's really a mindset, and it's really this philosophy and just approach to life of, am I living an aligned life, and am I making even the most micro decisions, like what do I want to do this weekend? Do I go to this party or do I not? That that question helps us answer them.
yeah, amen to that. Okay, last one. What would you do today, or it's midway through the day, let's say tomorrow, if you knew that you couldn't fail?
If I so as context, I have danced and performed Indian dance for over 35 years in my life. And I always wish I knew how to sing properly as well, because I think that's just like this killer combo. And so if I could sprinkle magic fairy dust, I would be an incredible singer. And I would also not have had 2 knee surgeries and would be able to dance in the same way I once could and would be
Yeah,
like a performer. Uh,
yeah.
yes.
So in other words, if you knew that your knee would not blow out,
Yeah.
what would you do? You would, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yes.
No, that's cool. Great answer. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing great work, and congrats on the book release. And
Thank
next
you so
time,
much.
when you get the next book ready to publish or release, reach out, let us know. We'll have you back on.
Thank you.
Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of the guest. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. The commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by the guest or RFG Advisory or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change anytime without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. The guest and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.